Good evening. This is Maestro Cortello with the Dawn of War 2 Retribution Elite Modcast. Today we have a 1v1 on Calderis Refinery. Our first player today is Kisuke. Well, he's actually just Kisuke. He used to go by Kisuke the Forgiver. He is playing as a chaplain-looking Force Commander. He is nevertheless definitely a Force Commander, but he does look quite intense with that skull helmet. The Force Commander is a tanky melee hero, very tough single entity, good for tying things up. And especially later on, he can get some pretty powerful weapons like that Thunder Hammer, that Power Fist, and he can also kind of become a jump unit when you get the Teleporter pack, which can also be very, very powerful. Next up, we got TLV Soul Drinkers. Soul Drinkers is playing as a Death Corps of Krieg Commissar Lord. We can tell that he's the Death Corps of Krieg because he is wearing a gas mask, and we will have some Wehrmacht-looking guardsman, rather. But anyway, the Commissar Lord, slightly tanky melee hero, does have a nice sword to start out. He does also have a free energy shield, but it is the least efficient energy shield in the game. And he can also buff his troops a bit by shooting them in the head, which makes them do twice as much damage. So we have a Imperial Guard versus Space Marine matchup. This is a matchup that, according to Torpid, who is a very good player, although certainly some people will contest his opinions, this matchup favors the Space Marines, although I'm under the impression that it is easier for the Imperial Guard than, say, Chaos or Eldar. However, perhaps it still favors the Imperial Guard. I'm actually not sure myself. I don't have enough experience playing this matchup on the Imperial Guard side of it. Certainly back in retail, used to play a lot of Space Marines, so I've definitely played a bit on the Space Marine side. But I think it's interesting to see that Kisuke has actually opted not to get a second Scout Squad, which is fairly atypical considering in 1v1, some people will actually argue that getting 2 Scouts is mandatory. However, I'm not surprised to see Kisuke go for this Devastator very quickly. Suppression teams are typically pretty good against Imperial Guard early on. Certainly back in retail, it was pretty effective against them. It is a bit less effective against Imperial Guard now that they have the Artillery Spotter unit. So I wonder if we'll see Soul Drinkers get that. I have a feeling we will. One of the challenges of the Imperial Guard is that they don't have a jump unit. So they don't have that particular answer to suppression teams that I believe every other race in the game has. And if I just quickly run through things, yes, every other race has at least one jump unit. Even if it's not in Tier 1, they do have at least one jump unit. So Imperial Guard is the only race without a jump unit. So it's slightly, they just don't have that particular answer for dealing with setup teams. And in retail, it was a bit tough for them to deal with setup teams, and it can still be a bit tough for them to deal with setup teams. And it can certainly, with the build that Soul Drinkers has right now, it can be tough. The Devastators can control the space that the Sentinel is allowed to operate in, because the Sentinel can't afford to get too close to the Devastator while being inside the Devastator's firing arc. Now, in this particular occasion, it managed to get out of the Devastator's firing arc and then stop it. That is good. That is one of the things you do need to try to do, but you also have to be very, very careful. Because if you get caught really close to the Devastator and you're inside its firing arc, the Sentinel can take a lot of damage, because suppression teams do more damage the closer you get. So that limits the effective range of the Sentinel, and it can also suppress and damage the guardsmen that are repairing it. So that's just part of the challenge that basically a Devastator or any suppression team really can present for the Imperial Guard. Now we do see a Flame Attack upgrade on the Tactical Marines, which is overall a very good upgrade. I feel that it's always been very, very good for these kind of situations where you can walk your Tactical Marines up, the generator farm happens to be undefended, you can get that Flamer as an opportunity upgrade, and then you wipe an entire farm, and then you also decap with 50% faster cap speed. It's even better now in Elite Mod, now that Flamer cost has been reduced. I believe it also received an increase, like 100% fire on the move. I'm embarrassed to not have the exact details on that. This is getting a little bit scary, though, for the Force Commander, or rather for the Sentinel. Sentinel does need to keep microing. Unfortunately, the Sentinel does not have that that range support now from the guardsmen, because they were getting suppressed by the Devastators. Kisuke right there, or rather Soul Drinkers, was relying on those guardsmen to focus down the Force Commander as he was chasing down the Sentinel, but then they got suppressed and their damage output was quite severely reduced. Now overall, Kisuke is definitely on the better end of those early engagements. Right now he is at a disadvantage in terms of VPs, but fully wiping a generator farm and also decapping it is definitely the bigger victory, especially considering he managed to keep most of his power farm. And Soul Drinkers, I think, tried to counter bash a bit, but he just couldn't do it quite as quickly because he didn't have something like a Flamer. Now, he could, of course, upgrade to a Flamer on his Guardsmen. That would be very, very good for bashing generators, but that's the Flamers for the Guardsmen, generally considered not nearly as desirable an upgrade for Guardsmen as it is for Tactical Marines. Since, of course, with the Tactical Marines, you can change the upgrade later on to a missile launcher or a plasma gun, or you can just go ahead and get Stern Guards. However, with the Guardsmen, once they get those Flamers, they are locked into that that upgrade until either the end of the game or until the squad dies, which you don't really want the squad to die. And particularly in this matchup, and probably any power armor matchup, you're probably going to want the plasma gun upgrade, just because the DPS, as well as the cost efficiency you get out of double plasma gun guardsmen, is very, very good against power armor races, since you will very, very quickly take out a model off of, say, a tactical marine squad or even an assault marine squad before, well, basically you'll just very, very quickly take out a model, and the Space Marine players really don't want that to happen because it's not really worth it for them to lose a model. So they really want to minimize that happening. But when you have double plasma guardsmen, they can't really just, the tactical marines can't really just stay in a fight and just take the damage the way they could in Tier 1 when the guardsmen only have las guns. Now we do have assault marines right here, and right now these assault marines, I feel, especially in combination with the Force Commander, may be a little difficult for Soul Drinkers to deal with. Soul Drinkers only has his Sentinel, that's really his only melee counter. He does also have his Commissar Lord with the Power Sword. The Power Sword gives the Commissar Lord a ability that is very similar to Battlecry. It's basically the same, except it also gives him a speed buff, but it does give him an ability that allows him to do knockback on commands. And one thing I learned recently is that it actually, I believe, does do a little bit of a damage buff to allied units. And we do see some yellow circles around those guardsmen. I think that's the buff that's coming from the lead by example ability from the Power Sword. So I guess Soul Drinkers at this moment is relying on his Sentinel and his Commissar Lord to counter-initiate against melee. He doesn't have an extra sort of counter-initiation in the form of, say, Catachan Devils or even a heavy weapon team. Catachan Devils are a unit that apparently Imperial Guard players have been saying are actually that there are a lot of problems with Catachan Devils and that there are a lot of reasons to not want to get them for Imperial Guard. Although, certainly for the purpose of counter-initiating against melee, they can still definitely work and function quite well in that role. Now, map control, at this point, map control does seem pretty even. We do know that Kisuke definitely had that early advantage with the way he managed to bash power while retaining most of his. Perhaps for that reason, perhaps that's why Soul Drinkers tried to go with a very light Tier 1 and then just go to Tier 2. He only got 3 squads, which is considered a short Tier 1. Now, Soul Drinkers needs to be very, very careful right here. Try not to lose his Commissar Lord. Now, he used the Commissar Flare Global to reduce the range of that Devastator, and that allowed his Commissar to not get suppressed anymore. But you need to keep in mind, of course, that the Flare reduces range for units. So if you actually get really close to it, it can start firing it again. And I even briefly selected the Devastator, and we did get to see its reduced firing arc. It still had a firing arc, it was just reduced. But if you walk into that reduced firing arc, the Devastators are still going to open fire. That being said, that Commissar Flare Global is a very, very powerful global. It is, I think, it's definitely one of the Commissar's best assets. It's an engagement winner global. It can just basically win you in an individual engagement. And although at the start of the game it can be tough to find the red to use it, Usually later on, you can start using it more and more, because it costs only 75 red. I don't know what I don't remember what the cooldown is exactly, but it is definitely short enough that it can either be used every engagement, or at the very least, every other engagement. Now, this engagement, unfortunately, I don't like the positioning right here, and I'm afraid this is not going to go well for Soul Drinkers. And then immediately we see just a full retreat from all of his guardsmen. Unfortunately, they basically just got jumped on by the Assault Marines, and at that point they couldn't do much. Meanwhile, oh no, the Force Commander is chasing down. He was chasing down the Sentinel, and this Sentinel has also been having a lot of close calls. The Sentinel now needs to just keep going straight to base. Oh, I thought he was actually going to. I thought Kisuke was actually going to try to pursue and finish off the Sentinel, actually with the range fire of these Assault Marines. But right now, Kisuke is looking strong. They kind of had even map control, but Kisuke is definitely at an advantage right now. He's at an advantage in terms of, like, first of all, the amount of real units he has. He just has more squads. He has better map control. He also managed to take out the Commissar Lord. So we do see a squad of Stormtroopers right here. They do have the Assault Kit. That does give them a damage increase as well as a range increase. And new in the Elite mod, it does, of course, give them that. It does give them a Fragmentation Grenade, or I don't know if it's a Fragmentation Grenade, but it's a grenade. It's a grenade that does damage. And here we go now with the kind of the Imperial Guard ranged fire. And right now we've definitely been seeing Soul Drinkers losing most of his engagements lately. And I think that has a lot to do with the Assault Space Marines jumping in, disrupting most of the Guardsmen, and then the Sentinels relatively unsupported, and especially the Force Commanders running in there as well. So Soul Drinkers, I feel, has actually not really had enough melee control. He's been getting overrun a little too much by melee units, which is a little bit ironic considering Space Marines usually not quite known for their melee units, although definitely known for their Force Commander. Vengeance rounds up on the Devastator, and combined with the Tome of Time, or the Veil of Time rather, on the Librarian. And I really, really like that combination, in part because the Vengeance rounds can be very, very effective against the Sentinel, since they will do a lot more damage, very quickly whittle down that Sentinel health. And then they also get the increased speed to chase, as well as the no setup time of using that Veil of Time ability. So Soul Drinker's starting to answer back. He decided to get some melee units of his own. He got some Ogrins, and those can be used to definitely counter-initiate against, I think, certainly at least the Assault Space Marines, although I think they will get controlled by the Force Commander's Battlecry. But if the Assault Space Marines jump in, the Ogrins can be positioned near targets that the Assault Space Marines might jump into, and that will have two effects. First of all, it will, if the Assault Space Marines jump in, the Ogrins can counter-initiate, since they are a bit tougher, a bit stronger, and they can also use their charge ability to knock down the Assault Space Marines and disrupt them. And then secondly, it will actually that's kind of the explicit, really explicit and obvious effect that these Ogrins will have. The more implicit and less obvious effect is that they will just act as a deterrent to the Assault Space Marines jumping in. The Assault Space Marines will be more cautious to jump in. Kisuke will just be might be more hesitant to jump them in because of the threat of having these Ogrins. That being said, he's not quite listening, and we're actually seeing a slow reaction time from Soul Drinkers. Soul Drinkers is actually deciding to go for the Devastators with his Ogrins, and they can actually just kind of tank the damage from the Devastators. Meanwhile, he's still not really paying much attention to the Assault Space Marines, and I think there's, again, a little bit of slow reactions right there, a little bit of drop micro. If he had a stomp right there. I mean, he still used the Ogrins to good effect to stop the Devastators. But he did kind of let the Assault Space Marines just run all over his ranged units. And right now, Soul Drinkers does have a very, very scary ranged blob. He does have his double guardsmen. They don't have levels yet, but they're still double guardsmen with plasma guns. They should, again, be able to very quickly bleed a model off the Tactical Marines. And even the Devastators, if he uses the Flare in combination with his Guardsmen, he can also bleed models off the Devastators even more quickly. And then, of course, we do have the Stormtroopers. Stormtroopers, they only do piercing damage, but they do have a pretty high base DPS, as well as just having longer range. They have longer range than most units. Most units have a standard range of 38. I don't actually recall the range of Stormtroopers, but they just outrange other squads. And we can see that right there. The Stormtroopers were actually positioned behind the Guardsmen, and they were able to shoot while the Guardsmen still had to walk forward a little bit. So Assault Kit Stormtroopers can definitely be a scary unit. And although we haven't seen it, they can also infiltrate as well. And that can be used to quite good effect in combination with their grenade. And that's also something that that Soul Drinkers could use as another answer to the Devastator squad. So we haven't seen him do that yet. He might want to consider that, because that's something that could definitely be good against the Devastator squad, especially since I've seen a few times. Right now, Kisuke's Devastator is at 3 out of 3 models, but there definitely have been times when I've been seeing him run around with only 2 out of 3. And especially when you run around a suppression team with only 2 out of 3 models, it can become very, very vulnerable to grenades thrown by infiltrated units, since those grenades could actually potentially wipe out the entire squad. And Kisuke has also, the way Kisuke has been playing, he's been very, very aggressive. Jumping in with the Assault Space Marines, and he's been jumping in even with the threat of these Ogrins right here. But we see Kisuke is actually using, Soul Drinkers is using the Ogrins in the way that I just mentioned. He's using it to counter-initiate against the Assault Space Marines. The Ogrins are winning handily against the Assault Space Marines. They lost their Sergeant. But Kisuke, I like the aggressive play. It just, aggressive play often just looks impressive. It's exciting. He's jumping in with the Assault Space Marines, running in with the Force Commander, and he's also coming in with the Devastator Marines with the Veil of Time. And we see that it seems like almost every time he uses Veil of Time, it's on the Devastators. You can use it on any unit, and to good effect. It's often also combined. Well, I say often, but maybe classically, when more people use the Veil of Time, it's also used on Assault Marines. You can be very, very aggressive with them, but he's using it a lot on the Devastators. And those Devastators are able to just run up very quickly and then open fire very quickly, because they don't need to set up or tear down. So Soul Drinkers now with a bit of an advantage in VPs. Kisuke has been aggressive, but I actually feel like lately the aggression has actually been costing him, and now he's starting to lose engagements. And I think that it actually, again, has a bit to do with these Ogrins that Soul Drinkers has. So the Ogrins have actually been proving themselves to be a pretty good choice. One thing Kisuke can do, he might even want to get shotguns on his scouts, and he can use that to try to knock over the Ogrins once they're trying to counter-initiate against the Assault Space Marines. And this is unfortunately a very bad position for the Assault Space Marines. Definitely going in. Kisuke is still being very aggressive, but there he's also sending in his units just without support. And he's doing it again, unfortunately, with this Force Commander. And now he's going to be under strength in terms of what he does have on the field, because he has his range units out on the field, not his melee units. And I actually feel his range units, head-to-head, I feel his range units, Kisuke's range units are going to lose to Soul Drinkers. But again, we see every time, wow, that was actually, I feel that was a mistake. I feel that was a very premature retreat by Kisuke. Considering he had the Devastator set up, they could have started shooting and suppressing. Maybe, however, he saw these Stormtroopers coming to the side. And now it's actually Soul Drinkers with very, very dominating map control, but we also have this to consider. Now, the Land Raider Redeemer, I think there are a lot of things that can be very, very good against about the Land Raider Redeemer against Imperial Guard. First of all, the damage it's going to be putting out, I think will be very, very good against the Imperial Guard blob, especially because right now Soul Drinker's composition can't actually do a whole lot against the Land Raider. He's pretty much gonna need new units, so he's deciding to get a Leman Russ, and I think that is a pretty good choice. But I think now the Land Raider's just in the wrong place. It's not in the engagement, so now Kisuke is still just fighting with his infantry units, and he needs to be very careful about that. And we actually see another full retreat, and I'm not sure why Soul Drinkers did that full retreat. Maybe because he was getting suppressed by these Devastators, or just he saw the positioning of those Devastators, and now I think this is going to be the end of this Sentinel. Just a few more bolt pistol shots, yep. And now Kisuke is just walking on top of a bunch of landmines. But, I mean, that Sent did last all the way into Tier 3. It had a good life. Sentinels usually don't last past Tier 2, and it's difficult to keep them alive in Tier 2. Just with the increase in damage you get from things like plasma weapons, or just higher DPS coming out of certain units. So, Soul Drinkers now does have something to deal with this Land Raider. He's upgrading, also immediately upgrading to get the Vanquisher. And the Vanquisher will be very, very nice. I mean, right there, it took out over 200 damage in a single shot. Although that second shot seemed to be less powerful for some reason. Maybe it's only getting splash. Although Kisuke now, he's being aggressive. Kisuke is, in general, he's being just very aggressive. That seems to be a common theme for him. He needs to get his Devastator set up, and he's about to pin Soul Drinkers in his base. Well, he's about to pin him with his positioning. Ogryns, oh, very, very nice. So the Ogryns were getting suppressed. They were just about to get out of the Devastator firing arc, but then that frag assault from the Land Raider was actually able to knock them down. And we're going to see this Land Raider used as a reinforcement point. So he's just going to go right here, and he can actually just kind of keep up the pressure, which is pretty amazing. This will help Kisuke a bit since he is behind in map control, but Kisuke now, he's actually going to need something to help him deal with this Lehman Russ. So we'll see what he chooses to get with that, because the Land Raider actually head-to-head is definitely going to lose to the Lehman Russ. It does have a multi-melta on top, so that can do some damage to the Lehman Russ, but the multi-melta does have short range. Meanwhile, the Lehman Russ has pretty long range. It actually has longer range than the other tanks when you get that Vanquisher cannon. But I'm wondering if we'll see maybe a missile launcher on the Tactical Marines. Devastator Marines do have Vengeance rounds, so they won't be able to get a las cannon or anything. And I think, yeah, oh no, this is actually going to be really, really bad, and Kisuke's not paying attention, just gets hit really, really hard. That was the Emperor's Wrath, and I was actually thinking, like, one of the things that Soul Drinkers should get is a Manticore, because a Manticore is something that can be very, very powerful against these vehicle-based super units, and particularly Land Raiders, since it can do a huge amount of damage to something that can't really dodge those shots very well. And then there's also the fact that Space Marine players, or even, well, whenever you have a Land Raider, the player with the Land Raider will tend to bunch their units around the Land Raider, because the Land Raider provides auras, because it provides reinforcement. So that can actually be, and then you can't really retreat away from a Manticore strike because you're retreating right to the Land Raider. So Manticore can be very, very powerful against a Land Raider, and particularly powerful against the units that try to retreat to the Land Raider. Meanwhile, we actually have some sneaky Assault Kit Stormtroopers bashing Kisuke's entire power farm. So at this point, both players are going to have no power farms whatsoever. They are late into the game where power is not as big of a deal, although I don't want to say it doesn't matter at all. Meanwhile, Soul Drinker's probably also just trying to build red so he can have enough red to keep doing Commissar flares. Meanwhile, if we notice, Kisuke is at over 500. He's actually at 659 red. So soon we might see an orbital bombardment out of him, and that could potentially be very, very devastating. Pretty nice grenade to use as a counter initiation against those Ogryns, but they're so tough that they're still able to kind of tank the damage, and they should actually still probably win against the Assault Space Marines, especially if they use their Bonehead Charge. Yep, and they do use it. And this is overall definitely going to be a winning engagement for the Ogryns, so the Assault Space Marines trying to jump out of there right now. Now, the Force Commander taking a lot of damage, and he kind of seems like a deer in the headlight when he does that, but one of the things that I find is tough, oh no, Kisuke not reacting to these Emperor's Wrath, and now he's getting hit really, really hard. One of the things that's kind of tough about Imperial Guard is that they do have a very powerful range blob, and sometimes it's hard to just get sight on that range blob without getting shot to pieces when you finally do sight the range blob. And sometimes you also have to wonder, like, well, what unit should I even use to sight? Because if you use a squad, it's going to start bleeding and taking a lot of damage, and then you have to retreat and can't even really use that squad. Meanwhile, if you use a hero, then you might not have your hero available. Ogryn's getting right in here, but now the Ogryns are in a very, very bad position. Ogryn's actually down to only one model, and they're actually losing a lot of health. Unfortunately, that was an ill-advised charge, going for a Land Raider, except for the fact they actually take out the Land Raider, or rather, the Leman Russ took out the Land Raider, but I think with the support of those Ogryns doing some damage, that probably helped a bit. And the Land Raider's gone. I didn't even realize how low it was. Now, unfortunately, one of the things that I'm a little disappointed to see is Kisuke floating red massively. And, I mean, there are things where some of the things that go on in my mind, and probably through other players' minds, is that sometimes you might want to be cautious about using a nuke, since a nuke is a real gamble, and you might do it and not get a whole much out of it, and then not have red to do other things that might be a little more reliable. But in this case, with Kisuke swimming in red, he really shouldn't be hesitating so much to use his nuke. As soon as he can catch these double guardsmen, I think he should pretty much just go for a nuke on the double guardsmen. It'll give him field presence at a time when Soul Drinkers can't afford to give up too much field presence, as well as potentially wiping the guardsman squads. And I think especially now, actually, with a bunker, Kisuke is going to want to use that orbital bombardment. Because first of all, the bunker can be really hard to bust. Especially now, Kisuke does not really have a good build, I think, for busting that bunker. So I think the best thing he's going to have for that is just the orbital bombardment. And a bunker can also be something that's really, really, can do so much for the Imperial Guard. And right now we're going to see Kisuke lose his Force Commander. And Kisuke actually decided to get a second Scout Squad. I don't know if he got that while he still had the Land Raider. Oh no, Kisuke is falling apart. He is going to lose a Tactical Marine Squad. He came very, very close. And now oh no, he's going to lose this Librarian, I think. Librarian is definitely dead. Oh, that's it for the Librarian. There we go with the Orbital. Going to catch a few Guardsmen. Should also take out this bunker. And that might actually wipe some of the Guardsmen. Will it? Did it wipe one of the Guardsman squads? It wiped one of the Guardsman squads, I believe. Nope, actually did not wipe either one of the Guardsman squads. So unfortunately that particular orbital bombardment would not have been good for Kisuke unless it actually wipes squads. I think use it a little earlier on, and he would have been good for that orbital bombardment, even if it didn't wipe squads, just from the field presence that he could have gotten. By forcing all of Kisuke's units off the field, I mean forcing all of Soul Drinker's units off the field, and then capturing up the map. Unfortunately, at this point, I mean, the VPs are still pretty much even, but Kisuke's not looking strong, and he's going to definitely have to pull out a lot to bring this game back. And if he can hold on, if he can stall out the game, hold on longer, he might even want to hold out for another orbital bombardment. Assault Space Marines jumping in, probably going to go for a Melt-A-Bomb. Tactical Marine Missile Launcher, unfortunately, it seems to be out of range, and I don't think they're going to be able to finish off that Leman Russ. Yeah, unfortunately, this is not looking good. They do get one more missile shot, but the Leman Russ is going to need, it was going to need 2 more missile shots to go down. So Leman Russ is still alive. And he's actually trying to go for the Leman Russ with his Assault Space Marines, but unfortunately it's not going to work out, especially now if we see some repairs for these Guardsmen. And these Guardsmen are also going to get a lot more resistant to damage because they're leveling up quite a bit. They're both at level 4 right now. Ogryns themselves are at level 4. Stormtroopers level 3, even though I feel like they were not even really fighting that much. I feel like they've mostly been just running around bashing generators. But, at this point, it's definitely looking like it's going to go over in favor of Soul Drinkers. Now, the orbital bombardment, off the top of my head, I believe it has a 3-minute cooldown. And before, I feel an orbital bombardment could have kind of sealed the deal for Kisuke or come very close to it. And now I'd say it's his only chance. And I don't even know if it's even off cooldown yet. Assault Marines jumping in, but again, there's still those Ogrins there to counter-initiate against the Assault Space Marines. And now there's another orbital bombardment, so it's actually already off cooldown, but unfortunately I think this one's going to do even less. Lehman Russ is able to drive out of there and actually misses all the infantry, except for one lone guardsman, who doesn't even die. This one little guardsman right here, that guy is going to be the next Lord General. This guy survived an orbital bombardment all by himself.
The guard attack us from behind.
Actually, maybe not the Lord General. I forget what the... Because I don't think... I was definitely at one point checking the Lexicanum one on Imperial Guard ranks. I feel like Lord General is not the highest rank. And I remember they had a different rank for the Imperial Guard commanders in Dawn of War 1. It was like Governor Militant or something. Alright, at this point this game is definitely going in favor of Soul Drinkers. And I like a lot of things I'm seeing out of Kisuke, but he does seem to be struggling a little bit in the late game and trouble with closing things out. Nevertheless, good game. Hope you enjoyed the cast. Have a good night.